Shipp Channel, logging in on this is a Wednesday afternoon. It doesn't make any difference, but we are live right now. My guest this afternoon is Steve Monticelli, who is a journalist and the author and reporter of an expose that just came out in the Texas Observer. If you're not a subscriber to the Texas Observer, you need to be one, because it is an excellent information of investigative journalism, hard-hitting journalism of Texas orientation, and just great information you need to know about what's going on in the state and the powers that be, and holding the powerful accountable. And Steve, you're pretty good at that. You've been writing for the Texas Observer. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I've been writing for the Texas Observer. Gosh, how long is it now? I think maybe going on 2 years. And yeah, let's see. My first article for the Texas Observer back in 2022 was about the resurrection of a local chapter of the John Birch Society, which, if you're old enough to know what that is, or if you're a history junkie like me, you'll know that that's kind of a bit of a kooky thing. And so about me, I actually only started doing journalism in 2020. I was arrested on my first assignment for the Dallas Voice while reporting on a protest. And before that, I didn't run me off. So, here I am. And before that, I had done some other stuff. I had worked for a consulting firm. I'd worked at Google for about 4 years, and found myself drawn to journalism because I wasn't really seeing the sort of reporting that I wanted to see back when I moved to Dallas, which I grew up in, which was back in like 2019. Yeah, and I grew up in Tarrant County for most of my life. I attended public schools.
But you're from here,
in Colleyville. Yeah,
Colleyville,
no.
yeah.
So I was raised in the area. I'd say I'm a Texan, and moved away for college and jobs, but came back because this is my home. This is where my family is.
Well, you've written actually a follow-up piece. You'd written about Monty Bennett earlier, a few years ago. We'll talk about that in a second. But you have just come out with an expose. It's called "The Billionaire Behind the Bid to Break Dallas City Government." And let me just remind everybody that is the items, the propositions on the ballot, which is early voting has started. At the very bottom of the ballot, there are city propositions, I believe 18 in all. And the last three, S, T, and U, are the ones that there's this big campaign about. Vote no on S, T, and U, or vote for it, depending on what you think. But I think there's a massive campaign out now by every civic leader in the city of Dallas. In fact, the biggest coalition of elected and former officials and city civic leaders I've ever seen in 35 years of covering news in Dallas. I've never seen this kind of opposition to anything. But your piece is talking about the man behind the propositions S, T, and U. And just tell me and tell the audience, who is he? Who is Monty Bennett? Have you come to find out?
Great question. So, yes, as you said, this campaign pushing for S, T, and U, it's pretty well financed. They've bought a lot of ads, and they've been doing it since around the June, July timeframe. And they first came on my radar because I noticed that one of their board members of the Dallas Hero Initiative, which is what this campaign is called, is also a board member of one of Monty Bennett's companies. And so Monty Bennett, who is this guy? He is a hotelier, inherited a hotel business from his father, and took
You
it
call
public.
him a billionaire. Is he really a billionaire? I've never really heard of him.
That's an open question. I think a lot of places have described him as a billionaire in terms of the size of his businesses that he controls. They recently defaulted on a $410 million loan. So we're talking about businesses that are operating with, millions, if not billions of dollars of assets. So some people, I think, reasonably estimate him to be a billionaire. At the very least, he's a multimillionaire, very wealthy guy, has a home in Highland Park, which is not within Dallas city limits. He also has a big ranch out in Henderson County where he's actually registered to vote. So this guy doesn't really live in Dallas. He's not registered to vote in Dallas. And yet he has come out as the primary funder of this campaign to effectively change the way that Dallas city governance operates in ways that critics have described as, catastrophic potentially and could cripple Dallas's capacity for local governance. So he, for people who've been paying attention closely to like local news, DFW news, you may have heard of this guy because several years ago he got into this big spat with the Tarrant County, I think it's the Regional Water District, basically the entity that is responsible for ensuring that Tarrant County has enough water for its citizens. And he did this expensive campaign to thwart some plans to build this new pipeline that would have gone through his property in Henderson County. And
Okay, that's
since
fair. That's fair. If you don't want a pipeline going through your property, you fight it, right? Nothing wrong with that.
Sure, sure. Although he, did some interesting things, like he created a graveyard in the path of the pipeline and also brought in some exotic animals in an attempt to get federal wildlife protection. And then a number of other things, like he was able to convince a state rep to give his ranch governmental powers and create a new water district that he has since used in an attempt to annex some of his neighbor's property after seeking to condemn it. So I tell you all of that because that was kind of his origin story in terms of politics. At the time, he told D Magazine that he was going to get a lot more involved in state level politics after that whole debacle. And since then, he has. He's donated
What are
millions of
his what
dollars.
are his politics? What are his politics?
So that's a great question. He's been a major donor to Ken Paxton, for starters. He has donated, I believe, it was hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to the National Republican Party. So he's a staunch conservative. He has promoted school choice, or what other people might call school privatization. He has promoted, a number of initiatives at the state level around reducing taxes or transparency and accountability, in his words. But one other little telling fact I think about his politics that we got in our story, first reported by D Magazine, is that Mr. Bennett has admitted to being outside of the Capitol on January 6th. So he's someone who he believes that what happened on January 6th wasn't that big of a deal and was overblown. And so that's the sort of politics that he embodies
Well,
in.
he flat out accuses the media of lying about what really went down on January 6th, and because I've done some work on this subject, finding out more about him and his background. But yeah, he is a January 6th denier, and basically supported what amounted to an insurrection. So those are his politics. But he's also pushing other things. He's behind the scenes, kind of stirring up the politics in Dallas. What is his end game? Do you think?
It's hard to say exactly what his end game is. By his telling, he is doing all of this because he wants the city to be safer, and they want to be able to hold the city accountable for what they perceive to be mismanagement. Yeah, I think harsh critics look at this and say it's an attempt to weaken or cripple city governance and empower wealthy outside interests. And so ultimately, I think it kind of just depends on who you trust more when it comes to what his end game is. But I think, when we look at the propositions themselves, particularly the proposition I believe it's S, the one that would waive government immunity. It would get rid of um, the standing requirement in lawsuits. And so those two things, experts tell me, basically would amount to
Yeah,
one.
qualified. It's not. Yeah, it's qualified immunity that the city would relieve itself of,
Right.
meaning that anybody could sue them for anything under um, whatever pretenses the case would go to court or would be litigated and cost the city uh, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of
Hundreds,
yeah,
millions, maybe even.
yeah,
And
maybe
there are,
millions of
so
dollars.
no city has ever done a blanket waiver of government immunity. And there are some cities that have done selective waivers or loosenings of their government immunity, and that has cost them grievously. Like it has been very dramatically bad for those cities. And to remove the standing requirement would also mean that you don't even actually have to prove that you were harmed or that you have some sort of stake in the matter. And that's a very important thing because that prevents a lot of people from suing for just anything. And so if we were to remove both of those things, suddenly everybody who works for the city could be subject to a lawsuit for almost anything. So, it could be the trash man or the manager of the sanitation department getting sued because someone didn't like that they picked their trash up late. It could also mean that individual police officers could be sued for their actions. It would also very likely waive qualified immunity for police officers, which is probably why we're seeing one of the reasons why we're seeing the Police Officers Association come
Come
out
out against it.
against this, even though one of these propositions would mandate more funding for the police department and mandate more police officers at a baseline level. And so, you can see how a lot of people could have different concerns about these propositions, and it has created, I think, this really strange set of bedfellows in the opposition. So, on the one hand, you've got the Citizens Council, you've got some of the most powerful institutions lining up to oppose this, including the Dallas Police Officers Association, and then you also have the police reformers and the people who were leading the protests back in 2020. Those people are also opposed to this, and it's rare to see
Who's in
all of
favor
those
of it,
groups.
Stephen? Who's in favor? Do we know? And I'm not asking you whether you're for it or against it. That's immaterial. But do you know, in the course of your reporting, who besides Monty Bennett and those closely associated and those who work for him, who besides Monty Bennett is in favor of this? Can we name anybody? Can we name
Uh,
anybody?
the largest backer publicly in terms of organizations that I've seen is the Dallas County GOP, and
That they're behind it.
they have backed it multiple times in multiple public statements. They backed the signature gathering campaign. They have publicly backed the propositions themselves. And the head of the Dallas County GOP, Alan West, sidebar, who I previously saw speak at a QAnon conference in Dallas, he spoke at a fundraiser for the Dallas Hero Initiative that was held at a
Okay.
home in
Okay,
Highland
so
Park.
officially, the Republican Party of Dallas County is in favor of the three Dallas Hero amendments, S, T, and U.
That's right.
But
And that
that
would
doesn't mean
normally,
all Republicans are, right? Because there are
no,
plenty of Republicans who have come out against it.
that's correct. That is correct. There are pretty prominent Republicans, including the Hunt family, which they're major conservative donors. They've come out against this, and so it's not uniformly that all Republicans or all of the GOP are aligned with these propositions, but it is telling that the leadership of the Dallas County GOP is, because the Dallas Hero Initiative has repeatedly promoted itself as either nonpartisan or bipartisan. And yet it repeatedly amplifies and uses as surrogates extremely partisan conservatives. And it is not able to point to a single Democratic representative or organization that backs these propositions. So I don't really believe that they're nonpartisan, nor do I believe that they're bipartisan. I have come to the conclusion, based on my reporting, that this is quite explicitly a partisan operation seeking to influence nonpartisan local elections.
Yeah. And so let me just ask you, what's the nut of your story? What's the bottom line of your expose on Monty Bennett? What's the most important takeaway, or two or three? Because it's a very dense article. There's a lot of
Yeah.
information in it. Everybody, I encourage you to read Steve Monticelli's. It just came out last week. His article entitled "The Billionaire Behind the Bid to Break Dallas City Government." What's the bottom line of your article?
So I think the biggest takeaway is that many of the organizations that have most prominently promoted the Dallas Hero Initiative are tied directly to Bennett. And many of those organizations have not publicly disclosed those ties, including in reporting on those organizations in the news website that Mr. Bennett publishes himself. And so, kind of zooming out, there's been this very concerted effort to basically create a network of organizations that appear to be independent from each other, but in fact are all connected and tied to the same major donor. And that has allowed them to create this surround sound effect, is what we call it, and what other media critics call this practice of sort of having the same messaging coming from different directions all at the same time, as if it were organic and grassroots, when in reality it is a coordinated, well-funded operation. So I think that's one of the biggest takeaways. The other takeaways that I think are pretty important is that in the process of trying to reshape Dallas politics through organizations like Mr. Bennett's news website, the Dallas Express, him and his employees at his for-profit hotel company may have violated certain laws regarding the misuse of 501c3 nonprofits. And this is according to experts. These are statements that are backed by people who understand 501c3 requirements and the IRS tax code. And I think that's a pretty troubling thing for someone who is simultaneously trying to claim that transparency and accountability are important.
Yeah, he sued you before, right? Are you worried he's going to sue you again? Tell me.
That's a good question. So yes, he sued me and a local newspaper, the Dallas Weekly, several years ago for some reporting that I don't think was very favorable to him, but was accurate. And we won that suit. It went all the way up to the Texas Supreme Court, and we have won. So is he going to sue us again? It's a possibility. He does have a track record, as we report in my story, of issuing legal threats and of, in some instances, following up on them. But that's to be seen. We did some reporting on some of the groups that are mentioned in my big story over a year ago in 2023, when we still weren't exactly sure who was funding them. We also wrote about the Dallas Express at that time, and Mr. Bennett threatened to sue the Texas Observer and never followed through on it.
Well, and you've also your article is well written. It is very informative, and you have quotes from and interviews with people who believe the organizations that Bennett has supported in the past are nefarious to the extent where they get people to pose as protesters, and he hires people to pose as protesters. It's just the total absence, the reckless absence of transparency in his operations, right? What do those whistleblowers say in your article?
So yes, you're right. There were two different whistleblowers that I spoke to and quoted in the article that worked for some of those advocacy groups that were effectively secretly funded by Mr. Bennett, according to some documents and their testimony. And in two different instances, two different people who were working for some of these entities were explicitly directed to call me a racist and say other bad things about me. And neither of them agreed to do it, and both of them ended up being out of a job. They also called people like Tim Rogers, the editor at D Magazine, a racist. And in one instance, a family, a husband and wife that lived 2 blocks away from Mr. Bennett, were subject to these protests outside their house where they called them a racist for fairly petty reasons, I would say. And ultimately, this is so ridiculous because Mr. Bennett's newspaper is consistently trying to say that every other journalistic outlet in town cannot be trusted, and they're, doing fake news and that they're failing. When
Everybody's
I,
fake news, but his newspaper, the Dallas Express, is the
yeah,
only trustworthy news source, and yet he's not disclosing major conflicts of interest in his operations at his newspaper. Is that
right.
right?
Right.
Okay.
I had a professor and director of a very prestigious research institute at Columbia University's journalism school, which is one of the best journalism schools in the nation. And what she told me was that based on we found in our reporting, the Dallas Express isn't doing journalism. She said they're doing PR, they're doing influence
Pink
campaigns.
slime, is that what it's called?
That's one way of describing it. Yeah, this is just partisan media, and that's entirely their right to do. If
Of
they
course.
want to make a partisan media operation, there are plenty of them in this country. But the thing that I think has been extremely dishonest about that newspaper, or it's not a newspaper, it's a website, is that, well, one, they stole the name of a historic Black newspaper that went defunct. And then two, they have consistently and repeatedly claimed that they are objective and nonpartisan, and that's it, and that Mr. Bennett has no direct involvement. All of those things are not true. And even according to people who worked for the Dallas Express, we have a very powerful quote from someone who worked there for quite a bit of time, and he said, this is them doing what Mr. Bennett wants, and it's his policy positions and it's his agenda with the sort of under the guise of journalism. I'm paraphrasing that quote, but I think the point is pretty sharp there. And furthermore, we know for a fact that Mr. Bennett is the main source of funding for that website. And he has given millions of dollars in loans to this website, which is bleeding cash. And it really does raise questions around, is this actually a 501c3? Is this actually a charity? And those are the sorts of questions that the experts in my story were raising. And in one instance, one expert said, I don't think this is a charity and I think it should be shut down.
Well, it certainly gives you pause about the true motives of his initiatives that he has backed. He's distanced himself, I think, from any organization of the Dallas Hero. There's a few other people who are closely associated with him, and Monaco. What's his name? There's a guy named
Pete
Monaco.
Pete Morocco.
Morocco.
Yeah, Pete Morocco. He was a Trump appointee. He's also, I believe, he serves on a committee that he was appointed to by Greg Abbott. He is a partisan operative through and through. It's a wonder that they decided to pick him for this campaign that's supposed to be nonpartisan. And I I
But
think
the
that he
opposition is very bipartisan. I mean, I don't
that's
know that I've
true.
ever seen a movement against any initiative in this town that is more bipartisan than the vote no. Is that backwards? Probably
No, I
backwards.
see it correct.
Okay, it's backwards on my screen. The vote no campaign. If you look at the people who are behind it, there are politicians and Tom Leppert, is that him? Tom Leppert, yeah,
Yep.
a Republican. Ron Kirk, Laura Miller, okay, Democrats. But yet this is a very bipartisan opposition. I know you're not advocating one way or the other against this, but the vote no. I mean, it's almost an imperative from civic leaders and former and current council members saying, y'all don't do this. And now your article really kind of highlights the fact that there may be an agenda behind it, The guy doesn't even live in Dallas. Monty Bennett is a billionaire who has a history of not being transparent in his initiatives and his desire to allegedly sow chaos at Dallas City Hall. Stephen Monticelli, thank you for jumping on with me. Your article is in the recent issue of the Texas Observer, the texasobserver.org. Jump on and read that if you really want to know the guy behind ST and U. Thank you for your hard work and for your journalism as a 40-year veteran reporter in the city of Dallas and the state of Texas. I applaud your efforts to get to the bottom of a very, very important issue.
Well, thank you very much for speaking with me, and thanks for your kind words. It took quite a while to put all that together, but it couldn't have come at a better time. And so much of what's in my story kind of gives you the context for why we're seeing this now. So please do go give it a read. And if you enjoy it, share it with anyone that you know that lives in Dallas who might be voting, so that they can be informed.
Yeah, and check out the rest of the journalism on the Texas Observer too. It's they do great work, and they operate as a nonprofit. So donate if you can to the Texas Observer to keep your brand of reporting, since so few investigative reporters exist anymore. I'm basically out of the business now, but I do want to advance any important reporting, and this is important reporting. Stephen Monticelli, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.